This is a great tutorial that focuses on value and how to render a sphere in Photoshop. After your document is set up, you'll want to double check your workspace in Photoshop. Go to Window, Workspace, make sure that you are on Essentials Default. The next thing that you want to go to is the Layers panel, which should be at the lower right if you are in this workspace. And you want to press the plus and the square so that you can have a new layer to work on. Layer 1. This is where you're going to have the main sphere, and then you will eventually tuck underneath the drop shadow so that it will go behind the circle when you are done, or the sphere, I should say, the rendered sphere. Okay, so the first thing that you want to be working with is the selection tool. Again, here's the toolbar. This is the command panel, so whatever tool you're selected, the command panel will show what that tool can do. And the top here is the menu. I'm going to go to the elliptical marquee tool. If you don't see, so at the right there'll be a drop down, a little white arrow and some extra tools tucked underneath. If you don't see those, you want to go down to the 3 ellipses at the bottom, press Edit Toolbar, and then you can add tools from there. With the elliptical marquee selected, I'm going to drag it out. I am choosing the right-hand side of the page because my light source is going to come from the right and my drop shadow will go to the left. The next thing I'm going to do is grab a brush. For this exercise, I use a soft round brush, something kind of simple, and I take up the size pretty large so that I can cover the sphere pretty quickly. I then am going to go over to the swatches panel. You may or may not have that highlighted to begin with, but if you don't, you can click on swatches, go to the grayscale folder and press the left side for the drop-down menu and pick a value that's somewhere in between. And then while the marching ants are going, that's what we call those little moving dots, start painting inside the sphere. You can use the mid-tone value for most of it, except for about where you're going to do the highlight, and you want to lighten it up there so you don't have to fight against a too dark of a value when you're working on this. As you can see, now I'm moving to the darker value here at the bottom. And then I'm going to move down. I'm working kind of quickly, but I'm going to use a combination of the soft brush, just kind of roughing that in, and then some of the blending tools to really get this to look 3D. So it's kind of roughed in. You can actually just go right here, kind of highlight it a little bit, and at least that gives me kind of a starting point. So again, the darker area is down towards the lower left, the highlight is here. Now I can move over to this smudge tool. You might have a finger there, there might be a little teardrop, that's the blur. You can kind of go in between the smudging and the blur tools to get the effects that you want. I'm going to start with the smudging. It operates like a brush, so you can kind of pick what brush you want, what size. I'm actually going to go back to the soft round, take up the size a little bit, and smudge. Okay. Now you might have to take your time with this. You can see that the computer's kind of catching up with me rubbing the brush over the top of that. If that's not getting the effects that you want, you can always go over to the blur tool. You can see I kind of have the strength low. You can go to the blur tool. Again, it operates much like a brush. Take the strength down a little bit and kind of work the surface that way. Okay. So blur. It does a little bit what the smudge does, where it makes it look as though it's blending in just a little bit more. Now you might have to go over this a few times. You might have to blur it down. You can see it's really working really well where I'm going over it now. Gonna have to blur it down, and then you might even take your brush again and fix up areas that maybe got too smudged. So on and so forth. Okay, so when you've got this, if you worked it a few more times and you got this kind of the way you want it, okay, you've done the blending, you've got the surface texture the way you want it, you can go ahead up to the selection menu and deselect, which takes the marching ants away. You then want to go down to the layers panel, create another layer, go back to your selection, the ellipse, the circular marquee. Okay. I'm going to show you, I'm going to go ahead and fill this in, and then I'm going to reverse the layers and also move my selection. So first off, I'm going to paint this in. I want this to be a little bit darker than the sphere. It's going to be darker on the edge and go a little bit lighter, and there'll be kind of a highlight when it gets close to the sphere. So I do need to change that. Okay, and kind of make it darker out here. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do then is take this layer and layer 2 and put it behind layer 1. That's just by dragging and dropping. And then I'm going to grab my selection tool or my move tool, make sure that show transform controls is selected, and I'm going to actually move it underneath my sphere here. You can see since I dropped layer 2 underneath layer 1 that it will go right behind and fit right in there. That is, so it looks as though it's underneath. If I need to do anything like bring it out, change it, make it bigger or smaller, I can do that at this point. And then again, I go to D. I check my selection with the check mark and then go to deselect. And that is your painted sphere.